Hello and welcome to NFL Live Week 10. It's good to be back. I'm your host, Sagebo, and with me today are the esteemed guests, Dr. General Manager of the Baltimore Ravens.
Hello.
And Storm, the General Manager and owner of the Chicago Bears.
Bear down.
So today, because it's the first NFL Live of the new season, we're going to try to recap for a lot of these teams, sort of what's the storylines going on. And we're going to start off by telling you guys our Super Bowl picks and MVP picks. We're halfway through the season just about. And so for me, coming into week 10, I've been really impressed with the LA Rams. They look pretty much unstoppable. They've had their share of injuries, but every week they still pull out on top. Brandon Sauter is playing like an all-pro safety. They've got Michael Bruce, a complete animal at the D-line. And then on offense, you have Daryl Murphy, unstoppable. And every one of his receivers, even his tight ends, are just putting up big numbers. For my MVP pick, I have Jason Johnson, quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. It's really been unreal, the kind of season he's had. The Packers season has been completely terrific as well, and Spurl's doing great things with them. And so I think one of the big games that we may see in the playoffs is a Johnson versus Murphy duel. And that's a rivalry that hasn't really been big in the league. We've heard a lot about Skaggs Johnson. We've heard about Skaggs Murphy, but we've not seen Daryl take on Jason to any big media hype. So that could be a big game coming up. Going to Dactor now, who are your picks for a Super Bowl and MVP winner?
So for Super Bowl, I'm going to go with probably the safe pick of, or at least going into this week, the safe pick of the Jets. They haven't had the hardest schedule, but they have looked terrific, and they just have an extremely well-rounded roster and the experience in the playoffs, I think, to correct their earlier mistakes. Obviously, this week kind of puts a damper on that, but I think they'll recover nicely, especially with Sam Chapman being so good this year, a real surprise. And yeah, I look for them to maybe do what other people or what people have been expecting them to do for years now and finally bring one home. For MVP pick, my pick, Emperor is going to love this, is Aaron Shea. When you look at his numbers, they're just pretty surreal. 21 touchdowns to only one interception, almost a 70% completion percentage. He's just been incredibly efficient, even though he's really the main threat on that offense, him to Mosey Bartos. And yeah, I just look for him to continue that success and to carry that team to the playoffs.
Very cool. Yep, he's got a really good start to the season, or statistically for himself. The Colts have actually bounced back after a little bit of a rough start. Jordan or Storm, who do you have for your Super Bowl champs and your MVP?
All right, so for Super Bowl champs, I'm going to go with the team that's been somewhat close, no cigar and not really a cigarette yet, but they've been in the playoffs several years in a row. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and of course, I'm talking about the Carolina Panthers. I think they're on track to win the NFC South. Everyone else is either in a tight battle for the division, or in the Cowboys' case, they're fine as well. But I think the Panthers have one of the best offenses out there. Skaggs, of course, but the receivers are excellent. Monte Jackson and Curtis Henry is a young combination that's hard for anyone to beat, but they can run the ball too. That's a dimension that I think a lot of teams, even the playoff contenders, they still lack. They don't have an elite running back, and I think Mike Loud is he's on that edge of being elite. So I think the Panthers, I think this is finally their year. They would have had a great shot if they'd stayed healthy last year. Latta got hurt, of course. So I think this is finally going to be the year in Charlotte. Now for MVP pick, the two quarterbacks who I would have chosen are both taken, and I'm glad I didn't have to say either of their names. But my MVP pick right now is going to be Von Abraham from the Dallas Cowboys. He's having a bounce back year, and so are the Cowboys, and I don't think that's a coincidence at all. Dallas is one of the best running teams in the league. Abraham himself is averaging over 100 yards per game. His touchdown total hasn't been the greatest, but I think I'm willing to give him a pass on that one, given that he's doing just about everything else as well as he possibly can. And because of that, the Cowboys are in position to win the NFC East.
There you have it, ladies and gents. 3 of the favorites for the Super Bowl and MVP race. It'll be interesting to see how all that shakes out as we get closer to the wire. With that, we're going to go into this week's games. Thursday night had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going out to Glendale, Arizona, where they beat the Cardinals pretty handedly. Dactor, do you have any takeaways from this game you'd like to point out?
Arizona's pass defense is really bad. That's I think the story of the game, really. Taylor Hayden had maybe his best game of the season and kind of a return to old form. But I'm a little concerned that it really is just a case of playing a really weak team. I'm looking for him to perhaps have a nice game next week, and if he can do that, then it kind of solidifies that Weeze has figured something out for them. But for the moment, I'm still pretty skeptical. And yeah, that's the story of the game for me.
Definitely. Hayden in the air attack was very solid. One note, he looked at his tight end, Jerry Sippa, a lot. 9 receptions, 118 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It may be an issue with the Cardinals' defense covering tight ends. Storm, do you have any takeaways from this game?
I'm going to actually look at Arizona's side, and I got to ask, what's happened to Marshawn Mathison this season? He seems on track for a decent second season after what he did his rookie year, but this year he's fumbled it more times than he scored. This game he was under 4 yards per carry again, and even with Kareem Taylor, even with a young but hopefully improving set of receivers, Arizona's not going to be able to do much if they can't get anything on the ground.
Absolutely. Marshawn Mathison had a very promising start to his career his rookie year. He was looking like a guy that could be their bell cow for at least 4 or 5 years down the road. But now I don't know if it's the defense trying to stuff him. We saw Frank Williams get through the Cardinals' offensive line several times to hit Mathison. But you just expect more out of the young running back, and he just couldn't shoulder the load.
Will the real Slim Shady please stand up?
The not so Slim Shady. With that, let's get into a very exciting slate of morning games this Sunday. A lot of surprise results, as you guys will hear about soon. But I think the first one to look at is Miami dropping one to the Bengals. The Dolphins have been on a bit of a slide. They've really struggled the last 5 games. But you'd think that Brian Brown should be able to outduel Joel King. Dactor, with you being in this division, what do you think the Bengals did right today?
Well, Joel King had a more efficient game than what he usually has. And that, I think, is really impressive because the Dolphins have actually had a top 5 pass defense statistically coming into this week. Of course, that has a lot to do with opponents, but it's still something worth noting. And Fred Preston had a really rough game on the ground, didn't really give Brian Brown any help, so the Bengals were really able to key in entirely on the passing attack, which obviously helps them out.
Yeah, Fred Preston with 2 fumbles, 1 loss. Marion Reeder also not helping out the Dolphins offense with a fumble that he lost. Do you think it was a case of the turnovers, and if they had managed to hold on to the ball, that the Bengals would drop this game?
Yeah, that's pretty likely, I think. It was a very close game even despite the turnovers, so without them, yeah, I definitely could have made the difference.
Going to Storm, I know the Bears have had trouble with the running back position, and you see a guy like Fred Preston put up 11 carries for 20 yards with a lost fumble. Storm, what would be the way forward for the Dolphins? Is it just over for Fred Preston? He should be a third string running back way down the line.
Well, he is a third string running back, isn't he? Behind Fuller and Marcus Berry, right?
Yes, I actually think so. I forgot about Will Fuller.
Yeah,
I think they actually benched Fuller after last week.
Will Fuller. I've never been convinced by Will Fuller in the first place, but yeah, it's a huge problem for the Dolphins if they backs aren't healthy enough that they can put a decent one on the field. I mean, you just can't ask Brian Brown to do everything for them, especially as their receiving corps has been depleted, especially as their pass defense has been depleted by transactions over the past couple of years. Like much that one player can do, and you just need someone to complement Brian Brown somewhere.
Yeah. Would either of you guys categorize this as an upset? In my mind, it is, but is the Dolphins slide really showing the true colors for this team? Let's go to Dactor first.
I think this kind of just reflects the trends of the two teams. The Bengals have looked at least decent, whereas the Dolphins these last 5 games have looked pretty bad. So I wasn't overly surprised by it.
How about you, Storm?
Oh, it's definitely an upset. I know that Miami's struggled these past few games, but they've all been against teams that are better than Cincinnati, or at least, I mean, maybe Houston's the jury's still out there, but at least on par with Cincinnati. And so for the Dolphins to lose this game, well, I don't know if it's worse for them if it is an upset or if it isn't. I don't think this makes the Bengals look much better so much as it makes the Dolphins really start to question themselves.
Absolutely. It's a tough loss for the Finns, but hopefully Barry gets healthy soon, turn it back around. Good showing out of the Bengals, especially by Joel King. He's been very interception prone this season. With that, we'll go on to another, what I would call an upset. We have the Eagles beating the Jets pretty handedly, 37-24. Storm, lead us off of this. What are your big takeaways from this game?
My big takeaway is it's about time, Philadelphia. I think this team has been better than it's been showing this season. They're better than their 4-4 record, or at least on paper, they're better than the 4-4 record indicates. And this was an offensive explosion long overdue. And, of course, that's not to take away anything from the defense, turning over Eric Weaver twice. So I think this is really what Philadelphia has been capable of all year, and it's just unfortunate for the Jets that they have to be the ones to face it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really strong showing from a bit of an underperforming Eagles side. Dactor, we saw Weggert get picked off twice, even though the Jets have a strong running game. What do you think the issue was with the Jets offense today? Was it just Weggert not executing, or do you think there's a fundamental problem?
I think it was an unusually bad game for Weggert. He's looked really good this season. You have to give credit to the Eagles' defense. They've actually had a really good pass defense for the most part throughout the year, despite placing some really good quarterbacks. And so I think that had a lot to do with it. In terms of why Weggert had such a struggle, maybe the game plan just had some issue with it. I don't think this really reflects him being bad or anything. And I think he'll turn it around next week.
Mm-hmm. Storm, we've all noticed the lack of a certain big-time pass rusher from the Jets. Will the real Alvis Brum stand up soon? What do you think this edge defender's career trajectory is like right now? Is he on decline for sure, or is the jury still out?
I don't know. Only 2.5 sacks this year, but at the very least, he's been getting in there and forcing some fumbles. So I like to think that it's just maybe luck. He's still hitting as hard as he ever did. It's just not getting to the quarterback in time. I think that's a potential sign, and always one to hesitate to say that a player is done. I mean, I've drafted Walt Peck on my fantasy team this year, if that's any indication. But yeah, it's not a great sign for Elvis Brum at all, and the fact that he still isn't making an impact, getting into the backfield on a consistent basis this late into the year, like that's a sign of alarm.
Last talking point for this game, Dactor. We see that the Eagles have taken down one of the premier teams in the AFC. Is this a team that can make waves through the rest of the regular season and maybe an impact in the NFC side of the playoffs? Are the Eagles legit this year?
Yeah, I definitely think they're legit. When you look at their schedule, they've had a really unfortunate schedule this year. They've played Carolina, Dallas, San Francisco, and the Rams all before this. And then in the second half of the season, they still have a couple good opponents, but I think they definitely have a chance at least to make the playoffs after today's win. And if they make it to postseason, then really the jury is out on them because that team can get hot fast.
Absolutely. That will move on to game 3 of the morning, the debut of Brad Davis as the Patriots win 30-24 against the Giants. Storm, how did Brad Davis do in his first action in regular season NFL play?
Not very well. Barely completed half his passes, 1 touchdown to 1 turnover. Really, a lot of this was on the back of Elvis Williams, who had a fantastic game, more than Brad Davis, who kind of came along for the ride.
Dactor, you're a pretty big defense guy. When you have players like Kenyatta Henderson on your defense, players like Aaron Hammond, Curtis Lewis, how do you allow Elvis Williams to go 20 carries for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns?
I'm not sure. I'm wondering if maybe they played the pass even though they were facing off against Brad Davis. I'm not sure what their game plan looked like. Their run defense hasn't been that bad throughout this year, but it hasn't been good either. It's actually been bottom 10 statistically. It does look like they've actually been focusing on the pass in general, which makes sense with Will Hall and their defense. So I'm not sure. Maybe they just aren't built to face a running back like Elvis Williams. Maybe the game plan is just off for him. It's hard to say for sure.
Storm, we saw the Patriots jump out to an early lead. It was 20-7 at half. Do you think getting a big lead and then trying to grind out the result is a good winning recipe for the Patriots, or is this just a fluke win?
I mean, I think if you can do it, it's good for any team, but I don't think it's necessarily sustainable unless they can figure out what their answer is going to be at quarterback. I think Elvis Williams is the type of running back who can occasionally get you this kind of game. He's not the kind who can do it every game. They don't have an elite wide receiver who can just break down defenses all by himself. So really, it's like they have to rely on someone happening to get hot on a game-to-game basis, and that's not going to happen every game. So it's a good, solid win for the Patriots, but it's not a formula that they can count on every time out.
I would definitely agree on that. They seem to need a big-time player to come up with big-time execution, and it's just not sustainable. The last question to Dactor. We've heard a lot about the Brad Davis versus Lawyer Johnson debate, especially out of Boston. Do you think Davis showed enough in his debut to keep the job for the rest of the season, or is this going to be a storyline we hear for weeks to come?
I definitely think this is a week-by-week thing. It doesn't sound like the Patriots are completely confident in Brad Davis, having talked to Sleuth about it. And, I mean, he really wasn't impressive, despite the fact that he does have a bad receiving core. It's definitely something to keep an eye on as the season progresses. I don't think they're completely done with Lawyer yet.
Excellent point. It's something to keep an eye on, Lawyer Johnson versus Brad Davis. Next game, we have the surging Kansas City Chiefs beating down the Buffalo Bills on another quarterback debut, the first week of David Kaplan in regular season play. Storm, again, what did you think of Kaplan in his first game?
I mean, he didn't do much better than Brad Davis. Excuse me. He just threw more passes. Ended up with more yards because of that. Had an extra interception, but at the same time, I mean, Buffalo doesn't really put Kaplan in any kind of position to succeed. So I'm more willing to give him a pass than I am to Brad Davis. They don't really have anyone for him to throw to. They gave Chad Dess the ball 13 times. I mean, I think this was about as much as they could have expected out of Kaplan.
With the Chiefs, you saw consistent scoring. They put up a touchdown every quarter. What do you make of this resurgent offensive outburst, Dactor, that we see Thomas Wheeler and the Chiefs orchestrating throughout the last 4 games?
And Miles might have, or Mimsy might have fixed their game plan up a bit, but you also have to look at the opponents. They've had a really weak 4-game slate. Arizona has a bottom 5 pass defense. New England's pass defense is decent, but still, Buffalo's pass defense has been really, really bad recently, especially, and Denver's has been a little disappointing this year. So it's I'm not completely convinced of them yet, although they have looked good, and I'm interested to see how they continue on throughout the season, especially like next week they play San Francisco, who's had a pretty decent pass defense, and I'll be looking for that game and see how Thomas Wheeler especially performs if he keeps up this hot streak.
Mm-hmm. Storm, back to the Buffalo side of the ball. What would be the way forward for the Bills? They're 1-8 after this week, basically in the running for the Blow It for Bowman award for this year. What do you think the Fever and the rest of the Buffalo front office need to start thinking about as they move on to the future?
They should think about trading their 2 best players to Houston for a pair of first-round picks. And oh wait, they already did. So I think that's honestly, it might have been early to pull the trigger on that, but seeing them in the position they're in now, and seeing Houston. Well, we'll talk about Houston a little bit later, won't we? But I think a total rebuild is the way to go. There's only so long that Chad Dess is going to be able to hold up an offense. They don't have an answer at quarterback. Their entire offense needs a rebuild, and they could also use some of those assets to build up an even more ferocious defense. So I think Buffalo already in full blow it for Bowman mode, and I think that's honestly the course they need to stay on.
And last question, Dactor, again. Highly hyped Terrence Rogers was the first-round pick for the Chiefs. He comes out of this week with 15 carries for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. Do you think he's getting enough touches of the ball? And if so, why?
I think as long as Thomas Wheeler is looking excellent, they can keep that distribution up. Rodgers has looked more efficient when he has less carries, which kind of goes without saying, but it's been like more noticeable than some running backs would be. I think it's part of a larger trend that actually the running backs, the rookie running backs this year have looked pretty good, and I wouldn't mind seeing Terrence Rogers get a few more carries, but I think as it stands right now, as long as he's this efficient, it's working. So,
very good. Next game, we have the Cleveland Browns beating the Texans at home in overtime, 30-27. Storm, let's start with you. Texans really, really needed a win this week against a pretty solid opponent from the Browns, but they're still the Cleveland Browns. What do you think the feeling is like in the Houston front office right now after Week 10?
Okay, first of all, as former owner of the Browns, I take offense to that. But I mean, Houston, they can't be feeling good after this one. Like this was a very winnable game. It went to overtime, and it was a must-win. Like the AFC wildcard picture is so wide open that they can. I mean, even now they're still right in the thick of it. They're even if they're only half the game behind the Raiders for the second spot anyway. but they are not going to get there by losing winnable games. And this was a game they really had to have.
Meanwhile, on the other side, this is also pretty much a must-win game for the Browns to stay in that very tight AFC North division. Well, did anything in particular impress you out of them, Dactor, your division rivals?
Ryan Clark has been quietly very good this season, which I think is something we say every year, but it still is true right now. He was very efficient today, almost 10 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and that's kind of how he's looked all year. He really is the key player on this team right now, and if they're going to make the playoffs, it's going to be on his back.
With the Texans, we see Alex LaShore putting up 2 touchdowns, completing over half of his passes. It looks pretty good, but then you look at the other factor, 175 yards on 29 throws, 2 fumbles, none of them lost. Do you think this is just a piece of inexperience for the young signal caller, or is this maybe a sign of things to come in his career, Storm?
I'm going to lean inexperience. I don't think this was a very typical performance for him. Normally, he averages closer to 7.8 yards per attempt, which isn't near the top of the league. I think it's around I think it's lower half, but not very far from the middle. So I think this was atypical of him. What I'm more concerned about was that he threw the interception and got stripped twice by Ray McBride, and was honestly lucky that it just happened to bounce either back to him or toward an offensive lineman before the defense could get their hands on it. So that's 1 turnover, but it could have been 3, and that's what's more concerning to me.
It's actually interesting. Those were his first fumbles of the season.
Wow. Yeah. Big plays out of the former Jet Ray McBride. 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 tackles. He's coming along his way to be probably the leader of this Cleveland Browns defensive line unit. As a whole, they really restocked their defense this season, adding C.J. Thomas to the linebacking group and the big-time corner out of Penn State to their defensive backs. Dactor, do you think this is a defense that is presently a really strong one, or do you think they still have years to come before they get to the point where we can call them an elite defense?
I definitely am not ready to call them an elite defense. I think that they've done very well considering their age. They're a pretty inexperienced defense, and relative to that, they've been impressive. They have faced pretty weak offenses, I think, which helps. But as a whole, they've looked pretty good considering their inexperience, and I will think that they're going to be better in years to come.
Last game of the slate was pretty different from the rest of them, a lot of big talking points. But this one just had the 49ers going to D.C. and rolling on the American Indians. We see Todd Lester, 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then on the other side, Javier Fields, 140 yards, 2 interceptions. Let's start with Storm again. What is the path forward for the poor American Indians? Recent article from ESPN said that, well, Nephew Jack is probably one of the most hated head coaches in the nation.
It's harder to find a path forward for Washington just because they don't have the same assets as like Buffalo or Arizona. But I mean, at this point, you have to start looking for a new quarterback. You have to figure out if Ricardo Reed's even your answer at running back. You have to figure out if you have an answer at receiver. Honestly, the entire offense deserves an overhaul. They've now scored 117 points through 9 games, 13 points per game for the season. That doesn't tend to win a lot of ball games.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, like they just need at a minimum an entire offensive overhaul.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Javier Fields is maybe getting a little too much flack. When you look, they have a bottom 5 offensive line this year. They have maybe the worst receiving core in the league. He's really not put in a position to succeed. So yeah, I don't know if Yancey Musgrave would do any better, or if any other quarterback would really do any better with the current state of the supporting cast.
I mean, neither of them would probably do any better right now. But even with the supporting cast, like Javier Fields is putting up, like he's putting up numbers comparable to Norris Brooks here or Alexander Williams. That's not that like any circumstances. That's enough to get you benched.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking on the San Francisco side, the injury to Troy McRae had some people in the Bay Area pretty worried. And then we see Greg Hadnot come out, 21 carries, 109 yards. Dactor, do you think he put up a solid performance, or is this just the state of his opposition?
It's hard to say, again, just like these specific teams. The Redskins have given up like 100 yards per game against now rushing, which that's not a very positive sign at all for them. But at the same time, you can't detract from Hadnot having at least a decent game. 5 yards per carry is impressive for any backup running back, and I think the 49ers should be happy with that.
Back to Storm. We're going to actually talk about kickers now. Thomas McMahon had 2 attempts, 2 very makeable, a 47 and 51, a bit out of the normal range, but missing 2 in the same game. Is McMahon probably on his way out for the Redskins, or is he just a member of a really, really struggling team this season that is going to be completely overhauled in the summer?
Well, those are, I believe, his 4th and 5th misses of the season in 16 attempts now. So that's a real problem. He is only a rookie, but it's not a promising rookie season at that. He's shown a little bit of range. He's hit 4 40-yarders so far this year, so perhaps it's early to write him off. I don't remember if he was a draft pick or if he was signed. He had to have been signed, right? But if they still owe him money after this year, I don't see them getting rid of him when they have so much else that they need on both sides of the ball.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. This is a gut job at the Redskins, and it'll be very interesting to see how they fix it up. Looking back, go ahead.
Just one note real quick. Sleuth wanted me to say that W.K. Kaufman went 3 for 3 for the Patriots today from such elite ranges as 23 and 19 yards. And I think that's a really positive sign that the Patriots are going to be elite again, because they've obviously figured out their kicking game.
Rip Weathersby, that poor kicker punter. Last note before we start working into our Saturday or Sunday afternoon and Sunday night game predictions. We're looking at the 49ers again. They're the reigning Super Bowl champions, but they come out of Week 10 at a 6-4 record. Are they the same team that stunned the world with that great playoff run, or is this 49ers team going to be one that struggles to make it into the playoffs? Let's go to Dactor first and then Storm.
On the one hand, they've had a kind of hard schedule, but they have been a little disappointing this season. And when you look at their schedule going forward, they're in a rough spot. Their last 4 games are against Dallas, the Rams, the Panthers, and the Seahawks. All 4 of those games are very losable for them. And if I were the 49ers, I would definitely be worried right now.
All right, Storm? I mean, can't it be both? That yes, they are the same team as they are essentially the same team as they were last year, but also at the same time they have been disappointing this year. I think. I mean, football is a game that has a lot of chance in it, and I know the Niners organization will not be happy with me for saying this, particularly Jumanji, but I mean, sometimes the bounces just don't go your way, and with the Niners, they could very well finish with an identical 11-5 record as to what they had last year, and still wind up falling short this year just because the rest of the NFC got better. I mean, the Seahawks weren't good. Like they bounced back after having a bad year. The Cowboys bounced back after having a bad year. The Packers have bounced back. The competition in the NFC is different than it was last year, but also stronger than it was last year. So a similar Niners team to last year could just simply happen to miss the playoffs. I still think they're going to sneak in ahead of the Seahawks, but just because they happened to catch fire at the right time last year, they weren't an elite team the whole of last season, and I think this season we're kind of seeing who they are on a more long-term basis.
With that, we're going to go into the predictions segment of this podcast. 4 p.m. games start in about 45 minutes, so let's hit them first. The Pittsburgh Steelers travel to the Atlanta Falcons at Mercedes-Benz. Dexter, who do you have and why?
So this might be a little controversial. I'm going to give it to the Steelers. I haven't really been impressed with Atlanta thus far this year. I think they were the beneficiaries of a very easy schedule throughout the first 5 weeks. And I think the recent slide has just been kind of falling back to earth more than anything. And I think the Steelers have quietly actually had a pretty decent year thus far. And I look for them to really shut down A.J. Jefferson and to get a pretty nice win.
We'll go to Storm. Who do you have? Steelers, Falcons.
I'm going to go with the Falcons. I do think this is going to be a tight one. I don't think I don't necessarily like the matchup for either team in particular. I think Jefferson trying to throw in any direction that Dane Wilson's patrolling is a problem. But at the same time, I don't know that the Steelers have been able to for the Falcons' pass defense to get involved too. So I do think the Falcons are better overall, and I think with the Steelers' uncertainty at quarterback between Davenport and Rob Corp, obviously injuries have played a role in that. But I think the Falcons' defense is going to be what makes a difference in this one.
I'm picking the Falcons due to home advantage, 24-17, and with that, we're going to make our way to the slobber knocker, the hands-down big game of this slate. The Packers traveling to Florida to take on the Jaguars. 2 losses between both teams. Dexter, who do you have?
So I was going to do an article on this and a couple other games, actually, but I just didn't have time with finals. So I did a lot of research into it. It's going to be a very close game. The Packers have had a very statistically good run defense this year. In fact, by far the best in the league, but that's had a lot to do with opponents. And Saluna actually predicted that Asante Sol would get at least 150 yards. So we'll see how that goes. The biggest injury in this game is Marquise Reed for Green Bay, and that might have a pretty big effect. Barkley might be able to exploit that pretty nicely. But overall, I think Green Bay's offense is just a little too overpowering. I give them an extremely close win.
Storm, Packers, Jags?
I hate to say these words, but I think the Packers are going to win, and I'm not particularly sure that it's going to be close either. I think I agree that their offensive attack is just simply overpowering, and not just overpowering against bad defenses. They've been able to bring down fire from the heavens against teams like the Panthers. They even managed to outscore the Lions. That was a lower scoring game, but still, they've been able to go up against some of the best pass defenses and still torch them. And I don't think Jacksonville can really hold a candle to that. I also don't know that Green Bay is built to really stop Jacksonville. I just don't think the Jaguars offense is capable of fully taking advantage of Green Bay's defense. I would love to see Sewell rush for 150 yards and like 6 touchdowns, but I don't think that's going to happen.
My pick, go Pack go. Packers take it 30-21. I think Christian Barkley really struggles today. Just have the hunch. We'll go to game 3 of the slate, an NFC or an AFC West clash. The Raiders traveling to sunny Los Angeles, taking on the Chargers. Dexter, lead us off.
I have 2 words for this game. Tunch out. Without Tunch Richardson, this Chargers defense is just atrocious. The team in general is pretty bad. Although I am interested to see how Matty Ice looks this week. He showed a little bit of promise last week, just a bit careless. Maybe he can improve on that. But even if he does, I think this isn't going to be a close game.
Storm, Raiders, Chargers.
Raiders by a lot.
Raiders by a lot. That's a sentiment I can get behind. Raiders take this 38-13. Swift throws 3 interceptions. It's going to be rough, folks. Vote Gradishar for Defensive Player of the Week because it's going to happen. Now to a very interesting game. We have the Chicago Bears traveling down to New Orleans, taking on Aaron Devereaux and the Saints. Dexter, give us your thoughts.
So I'm not entirely sure what to even think of this game. I think the Saints actually match up against the Bears pretty well, and I think that gives them the advantage. But perhaps Norris Berkshire can turn around his season against this atrocious pass defense. And I think if he doesn't have a good game, then it might just be time to look for other options at quarterback for the Bears.
Storm, this is your Bears. So I can feel the prediction coming already, but who do you have?
Well, thing is, though, I am taking the Bears, but I do think this is an interesting matchup on a whole variety of fronts. I mean, Devereaux throwing against our pass defense is going to be a problem. I also think Gaines and Snead going up against the Saints secondary is going to make sure that Berkshire's struggles kind of stay irrelevant, hopefully. Honestly, I think the difference could very well be the Bears' defensive front against the Saints' offensive line. We've kind of had a couple down games on I think only 1 sack against the line, or I can't remember if it was 1 sack against the Packers and 2 against the Lions, or the other way around. But I think this is an offense where we can take advantage of an offensive line that's kind of been banged up. Get some pressure on the quarterback, hopefully force him into making some bad decisions. Regardless, I think it'll be enough to force some 3rd and longs, and at the very least get their punt team on the field once or twice, which might end up being the difference in this game. So I'm going to take the Bears in the shootout, but not by a lot.
I've got Bears 24, Saints 13. I think the weak spot for this Chicago team is that offensive line, and I don't think the Saints have enough to exploit it. They have probably the worst pressure creating front 7 in the nation. So I'm going to go with the Bears. And last game of the slate, Minnesota Vikings traveling to Charlotte to take on the 7-1 Panthers. Who do you have, Dexter?
I have Skaggs throwing for 400 yards and winning by 20 plus. This is going to be a really ugly game. The Panthers didn't look great last week, or the week before that, actually, but I don't think that's really relevant when they're playing the Vikings.
Storm, what do you have?
Okay, I feel like I'd have to be crazy to say I'd take the Vikings, so I'm not going to do that. But I am going to say one of the few things that the Vikings can replicate from what the Packers did against the Panthers is throw the ball a lot. I think, on the other hand, though, they don't have anywhere near the kind of receivers the Packers did. They just happen to have a quarterback who, on paper, is on par with Jason Johnson, even if he hasn't played that way this year. So I think that, combined with the fact that the Panthers haven't looked especially impressive since that hot start they had to open the season, means that this is not it's a non-zero chance that the Vikings win this game. But I'm going to take the Panthers because that's what any reasonable person would do here, because the Panthers really should be that much better than the Vikings.
Yeah, I've got Skaggs victimizing this Viking secondary. 38-7. It's going to be ugly, folks. Now to Sunday night. Big one in Indianapolis. Rob LeCount and the Lions go to town against Aaron Shea and the Colts. Dactor, what do you have?
So I'm not entirely sure what to think of this game. My prediction, I guess, will be that the Colts just barely managed to edge it out with the home field advantage. I think the two teams are kind of similar, fairly strong defenses, excellent quarterbacks, and I think maybe Mosey Bartos being able to crack open the Detroit Lions defense and even face off against Keyshawn favorably will be the difference here.
How about you, Storm?
I think this is finally the game that Aaron Shea cools down, and I promise I'm not saying that to be a homer because they're playing the Lions, so it's not like I could be a homer here. I think the Lions' pass defense is just that much better than the Colts, and I think that's honestly the key to this game. The Colts aren't the type of team that's going to get a lot on the ground. Neither are the Lions, but what the Lions will do is get more pressure in the backfield than the Colts, whose sack total has really fallen off this year after being close to the top of the league last year. Detroit only has a few more sacks than the Colts do, but the other thing that the Detroit's doing, they're hitting hard, jarring the ball loose. They just haven't been balling on it a lot. So I think I see more predictive value in forcing fumbles than recovering them, just because it can be so random whether or not they get recovered. But anyway, I'm kind of getting off track here. I think Detroit has a defense that's just more suited to take on Indianapolis than the other way around, and I think that's going to be the difference in this game. I'm taking Detroit on the road.
I also have Detroit 31-21 over the Colts. I think Keyshawn is just too good for Bartos, but I guess we will see tonight. Last game of the week, 7-1 Dallas Cowboys traveling out to the West Coast to take on the Seattle Seahawks. Dactor, take us away.
I'm really excited for this game. We're going to see a battle between the two strengths of each team. The very good, surprisingly great, actually, Seattle D-line and the Dallas Cowboys' terrifying rushing attack. I think in general, though, matchups like that tend to go a little bit more favorably towards the defense. So I'm going to say that Akwanko and those two old guys who are alongside him are going to at least slow down Von Abraham enough that Seattle will be able to win the game in a close one.
Dactor's got Seattle. How about you, Storm?
I've also got Seattle, and I'm actually not sure that it'll be close. I really love their matchup against Dallas's run game. I know I picked Von Abraham as my MVP, but here's Dallas's dirty little secret. They haven't played anybody. the Seahawks are quite possibly the first playoff team that they'll have faced all season. Now that we're seeing Miami on this huge losing streak. The best team that they played was Philadelphia, where they got destroyed. So I think, Seattle's shown a huge amount of improvement this year with the coaching change. I think they're still a defense first team, and I think that's going to be enough to win in this game, even if their offense doesn't produce a lot.
Yeah, like you guys, I love the Cowboys, but I think missing Romulus Jackson, one of their vocal leaders on this defense, is going to be a big one. Seahawks 21, Cowboys 17. That completes the prediction section of our podcast. We're going to go to the teams on bye. In teams on bye, I will just bring up a team, and we'll go around in a circle and talk about it. So Baltimore Ravens, Doctor takes away.
Oh, God. We're in a kind of awkward spot after today's 1 p.m. games because we are a game back from two different teams, I believe, in the AFC North race. And we've had, I think, the hardest strength of schedule thus far, but it doesn't get that much easier. We still play Houston and Oakland. I think we're going to have to be pretty flawless throughout the rest of the season to make the playoffs. And a big part of that will be Musa Good continuing to improve. He's looked better in recent weeks, but he does need to step up his game a bit more, I think. And our pass defense has really been bad this year, surprisingly, and that definitely needs to be fixed for us to come anywhere near the playoffs.
Storm, any thoughts on the Ravens?
Just that it's hard to tell what the team's identity is in the post-Booker T era. But I will say Reggie Watkins has been holding up better than I expected. He's at 12 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, a 90 passer rating, not necessarily anywhere close to elite, but it's solid enough. They're getting decent production from Musa Good, so I think as they get later in the season, maybe they'll figure out their offensive identity a little bit more. That might be enough to push them over the edge in a tight AFC North, but nothing's really distinguishing them from the rest of the pack for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is a transition year for the Ravens as they move on from their old stalwarts and into the future of Fisher and Musa Good leading away this offense. I have them finishing 6-10 or 7-9, so pretty respectable season, but not good enough to make it into the playoffs.
Well, 7-9 in the FC North, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. Well,
I don't think they're that bad this year.
Yeah, that division's a bit of an interesting one. So let's go to the Denver Broncos, led by Todd Jennings. Dactor, start us off again.
The Denver Broncos, I think, have taken a little bit of time to figure out this new offense. And Blacknall's fumbling issue has cost them quite a bit. He has 6 fumbles on the year, which I believe is second worst in the league behind Joseph Bowen. At the same time, they've looked decent, especially their defense. And I don't know if they're necessarily a team that's going to make a splash in the playoffs if they do make it, but I think it's been respectable considering, again, this sort of transition period they're in, and I look for them to improve next year.
Storm, thoughts on the Broncos?
I don't really understand how they're leading the division. I think on their best day they can beat anybody, but they also had that horrible loss to the Chiefs, which is looking less horrible as the weeks go along and the Chiefs keep winning. But they can't really seem to find consistency on a week-to-week basis, and that's that's probably the difference between being a shoe-in for the playoffs right now in a weak AFC and being half a game ahead of the Raiders and fending off a whole bunch of teams for the second wild card spot. I think a lot of that's just going to be growing pains with Todd Jennings taking the reins. Darren Warner probably wouldn't be doing much better in the first place, but it doesn't help that Blacknall does keep fumbling it. I think once they're able to, if they're able to resolve that issue, they're going to be scary though. But yeah, Denver is just, they're a team that's never made much sense to me this year, and I honestly would love to see this roller coaster continue just because it's kind of entertaining, honestly.
I look at Denver, and it's a team where I'm questioning the talent on this roster. Where is the star power for the Broncos? How are they leading this division again? Outside of Cameron Jonah, there's just a lot of just guys on this roster. And so it's been really surprising to see how well they're doing. We've seen guys like receiver, excuse me, I got something in my throat. Guys like receiver Darryl Mack, who's been prolific in the past. He's still leading the way for them, but it's nothing that just catches your eye. Todd Jennings has been quiet, to say the least. He's not a guy that's going to go out there and just dominate it up, but he's doing just enough to get him by. I don't think they have the talent to make the playoffs this year. I have them finishing 8-8. It's going to be a bit of a rougher stretch as they close out the season. Next team, 3-6, Tennessee Titans. Dactor.
The Titans aren't very good this year, but they do show some promise. They've had a lot of surprising people step up, especially cornerback Jack Ramsey and, of course, the now famous wide receiver Kevin Williams. And Xander Williams has looked bad. I don't know if there's any other way really to put it this year. And it'll be really important for them to fix their quarterback spot this offseason. But going into next year, where I think they're looking right now, if they can figure out that quarterback spot, they might be able to surprise some people with a bit of a playoff push in a weak AFC.
Questions on Xander Williams abounds. Storm, what are your thoughts on the Titans?
I think they've got a promising future ahead of them. They have a very strong defensive front. Tyler Jones and Charles Woods, both they're in their first and second years. Both of them racking up sacks like nobody's business. And the fact that they're 3-6 already, it's an improvement over last year in the first place. Quarterback obviously is something that they need to take a long, hard look at, and it would shock me if we didn't see Julius McIntosh in some capacity at some point in the season, just even to see what's there at the very least, because Alexander Williams has been that bad and probably won't be a starting quarterback anywhere next year. And I say that with all the love in my heart for him, but it's looking like the game's getting past him. I think if they can solve that quarterback issue, that's one of several steps they'll need to take on offense, but they may be able to get to a point where the offense can be passable while they let the defense do most of the work.
Definitely. They've got good pieces, good stars. Xander Williams, though, is a big problem. There's been several games where I've just looked at myself and was like, is this the worst performance in NFL history? Is this the worst performance in NFL history? And he can't get away with this. But I do think the Titans are a team on the upswing after coming out with that number 1 overall pick last year. I've got them finishing 5-11. Not good enough to make the playoffs, but a very, very good step forward. Last team, and then we'll move on to our next segment, but we have the Los Angeles Rams, who have just looked downright dominant. What are your thoughts on them, Dactor?
I think the key to this team is their defense. They have the number one defense statistically in both points per game against and yards per game against. And that's led by players like Michael Bruce, who have come out of not necessarily nowhere, but they weren't very hyped going into the draft at least. And now suddenly they're on top of the sacks list in the entire NFL. It's those types of talent that are just kind of scrounged out by Taffy owner that are really taking this team to the next level. And with such a scary defense and Daryl Murphy, I look for them to have a really strong presence in the playoffs.
Storm, thoughts on the Rams?
I'll add to their defensive stats. They're number 4 in sacks, number 1 in tied for first in forced fumbles, and outright first in fumble recoveries, and tied for 5th in interceptions. This is a team that is willing to bruise their opponents. They hit hard, they force fumbles, they get sacks, they make big plays on defense. I mean, and Brandon Souter, like, he's a safety with 4 forced fumbles and 5 fumble recoveries. They make plays all over the field, and they do things that not a lot of other teams are capable of doing on defense. And that's not even getting started on the fact that they have one of the best offenses in the league too. You can never count out Daryl Murphy. Even as Walt Peck's declined, they've been able to replace his production entirely without missing a beat. And now since they're spreading the ball out more, that just makes it even more difficult for defenses to handle every single threat that they have. So the Rams are a tough team to beat, a tough team to match up against. But if they're going to run up against someone like Lions or the Falcons in the playoffs, a team with a great secondary, that might be enough to slow them down because their run game is still a work in progress. And I think that every team has a weakness, and the Rams have very few, but that's a big one.
Yeah, Rams are an extremely well-built team. A lot of talent, both sides of the ball. They look very, very good this year. Got them finishing 13-3, winning the Super Bowl. They're a good side. And so that wraps up a lot of our midseason discussion. Well, we're going to open the shout box up to questions. I have a few for the panel that we can keep going for a while. Guys, if you could, let's take a look at the coaching list that came out pretty recently with the coaching list tiers. Event 29, fan opinion of head coaches. As soon as my internet is fast enough, I had a few questions. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. That way we don't rag on anyone too long. But in the should be fired category, we have a lot of hate for the Buffalo Bills head coach and the Washington Redskins head coach. Are these two teams' fan bases justified in this? And if so, why? Let's go for Dactor and then Storm. Do you think this is a coaching problem, or is this maybe a GM problem, or is it players not executing correctly for these teams?
I think for the Redskins, I think it's more of a personnel issue. They really are just completely empty when you look at their roster, and I'm not sure what Nephew Jack could really do with them. With regards to the Bills, I think earlier this season they probably should have been quite a bit better, but after basically giving up to the tank, I don't think any further blame can really be heaped onto their coach as the season progresses. So it's a mixed bag there.
How about you, Storm?
I think the Bills have more. The Bills fan base should have more questions for their head coach, given that they demonstrated that they could be successful last year and that they were able to beat the Jets earlier this year. So there's at least a spark there. It's just whether or not the players are executing week to week, or whether or not it's a game plan issue. There's a spark that's just not being turned into a flame here, and there's so that it's not solely a personnel issue. With Washington, it could honestly be both. I mean, like, scoring 13 points a game is just with a quarterback who's won a Super Bowl with the offense that they have, they should be able to find something out of it. Except that it's also true that they really don't have many pieces other than Fields, so a tougher one. But I don't blame the fan base for being angry at one win and 13 points a game.
For me, I think the Bills' issue is more on the player execution side. I was very disappointed with Joaquin Younger. He looked promising last season. He really did, as the Bills finished 7-9 in the AFC East. But he's looked so bad, and you can see the Bills organization is trying to put out whatever fires that's been caused. They started David Kaplan. He doesn't really show much promise either. I think their coach has a good system set up, but the player execution just wasn't there, and it's going to be something they really need to reevaluate, especially with these extra draft picks. With the Redskins, I love Nephew Jack, but I think one problem with this team is I can't name a single player the Redskins organization has drafted. There's been very bad player development for the Redskins team, and it comes in two pieces. For one, might be just the talent isn't there from the guys that Bright Falls is scouting out. And on the other side, maybe Nephew Jack's not putting these guys in the positions to succeed. It's been a rough road for the Redskins. So in my mind, I can understand the Redskins' anger from the fan base more than the Bills, but these are definitely two very unhappy set of fans, and hopefully these teams start turning it around and get the good citizens of Washington, D.C. and Buffalo much happier. We'll go to the next tier, the angry fans. It's starting to get hot. Chicago Bears. We'll go with the Doctor again. What are your thoughts on the Bears coaching?
I think the Bears have been pretty disappointing this year. Their offensive line has really struggled, which I don't think helps. But when you look at their front seven and the receiving core and everything, I do think they should probably be performing better. I'm definitely not ready to call for Darman to be fired, but I can definitely see how their fans' patience might be wearing a little bit thin.
Storm, these are your fans. How can you assuage them?
We can assuage them by winning, and we're not doing that right now. I think fans have every right to be angry with the coaching and the organization as a whole, given that this is year 4 and we're about to miss the playoff for the 4th straight year. And meanwhile, a certain team to our north is having their own resurgence, proving that it's possible to rise from the bottom to the top of the NFC North. So we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot I'm going to have to do in the offseason too, to make sure that we're putting the best team that we can on the field and making sure that we're not putting some impossible decisions on the coaching staff. So yeah, we want to put Darman in a position to succeed, and I think I never want to say next year because that's such a cop-out, but hopefully next year our fans will be rewarded for their patience.
Yeah, I think Darman's a good coach, and I think the players are there for the Bears. I personally really like Norris Brookshire. I don't think there's many quarterbacks that can go out there and do what he's had to do on a weekly basis, just throwing it as much as he does. He's one of the good guys in the sport too. But yeah, it's been a bit clumsy for the Bears, I think is the best word. Fixing the offensive line has to be the big priority, but you just can't have Brookshire being hit this often. He's trying to look downfield, trying to make the plays. The effort is there. The Bears have not given up. it's just that offensive line unit is just so important, and it's not really happening for the Bears. So I think when they start fixing that up, they'll look a lot better, and the fans will be happy. We'll bump over to the Minnesota Vikings, staying up north. What do you think, Dactor?
Again, I think this is a team that could definitely be performing better, but that really doesn't have great personnel. When you look, Vardell just kind of doesn't have a supporting cast. It's hard to even remark on a single player on that team or on that offense other than him. And the secondary has remained a continued struggle for that team, and it really hasn't been fixed yet. And until those things are fixed, I don't see how the Vikings are going to be much better than they are right now.
Storm, what do you think about your neighbors up north?
I think that there's very little that can be pinned on the current coaching staff. I think, and I also think that any blame that the GM gets is a little bit overblown as well. Obviously, some bad moves made in trading Chester Henson for peanuts, but honestly, I think the problem with the Vikings has been years in the making. They won that first Super Bowl. They made some good draft picks for a couple of years after that, and since then they've kind of just busted on a lot. They've never been able to build up their receiving core. They've never been able to build up their secondary. Even their defensive line is just uninspiring. And so so as soon as some of their players start to show signs of age, and as soon as they start to rebuild, they only have a few pieces that can actually be moved, and the whole thing's a house of cards, and it just fell apart pretty quickly. So I'm not really sure how there's a limited amount that they could do better with this roster, and honestly, the fact that their offense has taken such a dive is concerning. But I think this is something that could have been seen coming for a while now.
Yeah, my biggest thing with the Viking situation is just the previous regime really let these fans down. They had a great start, and then the original trio pretty much fell apart, and it's put a lot on Llamas and Bellwood to trying to scrape up what's going on, and they can't do that in a single year. This has been a long time in the making. It's gonna be a good effort out of them. I like Llama and I like Bellwood, and I think they're getting deeper into how football works for the site, and they're gonna start figuring things out. I've got faith in them. So I think the Vikings fan base just needs to give them time. Last one before the games might be up, but we also have other questions.
Yeah, we have.
New Orleans Saints really struggling this year, but the fans are not calling for their heads yet. They're just pretty fired up. What do you think of that situation, Dactor?
Their secondary is really bad, and until it improves, I think that team is just kind of doomed because of it. They've also had some unfortunate injuries to the offensive line, which I think has cut them a little bit of slack from the fans. But yeah, in general, they do need to make some changes, I think, on the personnel front more so than the coaching front.
How about you, Storm?
Yeah, I agree on that one. Like the Saints it's largely a personnel issue, and again, like when it is a personnel issue, it's not usually something that's happened over the course of 1 or 2 years. It's usually something that's been developing over 3 or 4. So this reaches back to this just. I think the Aaron Styles pick is kind of a popular starting point, but the Saints secondary was at a point where they felt like they had to reach on Aaron Styles. and that was not that took some time to get to. They still have a lot of excellent pieces, and they're still. And I think the difference between them and the Vikings is that they're making the most of those pieces. They're scoring tons of points, at least some of the time. So the fact that the fans can point to Aaron Devereaux and Sean Jenkins and say, okay, I see this is working. I see that this is a foundation that we can build a team on. It allows them to be a little more patient with the defense, knowing that knowing that the offense isn't gonna just drop off a cliff if the front office chooses to just spend a year building the defense instead.
Yeah, I'm almost surprised that the fans aren't calling for the head of the Saints. But maybe it's all the Mardi Gras booze. They're drinking the Kool-Aid, having a good time. At least the Saints do play exciting football. It's rare that you come out of a game without some oh my goodness moments. But I think the fan base is pretty close to start calling for his head. We've got 5 minutes. Let's take some of the easy questions in the shout box. Bubata asks, which player do you think deserves more recognition? As you guys are looking, I'm going to go with Jack Ramsey, cornerback.
I hate you.
Titans. 4 interceptions this year, ties for the league high, and 2 return touchdowns, also tied with the league high. This is a guy that's doing it a lot for the Titans backfield. They may not be winning games, but he's just a big example of the talent that the Titans have at their disposal. He's a young guy. He's only in his 3rd year starting, but he's just very good, very under the radar. I love me some Jack Ramsey. So whoever has a player in mind, go ahead.
Just as a whole, kind of the Seattle defensive line, it's kind of hard to say who exactly has been causing them to be so good, but I will go with Akwanko, just because he is the one who's he's the change. So I want to attribute at least some of the success to him. They've gone from being kind of mediocre to having over 15 sacks just on the D-line. They have a really top-tier run defense, as we noted earlier, and he isn't on the stat sheets all that much, but I think Akwanko has been very impressive for a rookie in terms of team impact.
All right, Storm, have you picked out a guy?
I'm trying to decide if Michael Bruce counts as underappreciated. And I'm going to go with yes, he is. I mean, do people realize that he has 10 sacks already and that he's leading the league, that he's a second-year player, that he's forced 2 turnovers, including a fumble recovery and an interception, and it took one of those back to the house? Like, he's doing it all for the Rams. I mean, I was watching him back at Texas Tech, and I was impressed by him, but I didn't think he'd be doing this well this quickly. And he's, I mean, honestly, he's in great candidate for Defensive Player of the Year if his own teammate Brandon Sauter doesn't make it himself.
Yeah, I'm gonna give some quick shout outs. DJ Gibson, tight end, Miami. He's been pretty much their only reliable target. Then the Green Bay rookie wide receiver Justin McCain out of North Carolina. He's really doing well this season. 40 catches, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns, only 2 drops out of the young fella. With that, we've got 2 more minutes. Let's take a look. Which team is in the best position to win multiple Super Bowls in the next 5 years? With this one, I'm sure will allow us to repeat. Wow, this is pretty tough. It's hard to go with anyone for me, but the Panthers, they've got Skaggs locked down to a long contract. Monty Jackson and Curtis Henry have shown a lot this season, showing that they could really be weapons. they can keep Mike Latta, I think they're in a really good spot. Just the personnel that they have locked down and who they are. I'm gonna go with the Panthers. You guys feel free to chime in. I'll alert y'all when games are up.
I'm going to go with a bit of a homer pick here, I guess. I'm going to go with the Packers. They're on like this massive upswing since Spiral took over. I think his coaching is exactly what the team needed to really turn it around. And they have a very healthy cap situation. I believe they might actually even be able to play a little bit in free agency this year. And they still have a couple holes, and I think those are the only things really stopping them from being the top team right now, like 100%. And they should be able to fill those in the coming years. So, yeah, I'll go with the Packers.
And I'm going to go with the Rams. I think they have a healthy mixture of young talent and veterans that a lot of teams don't have. I think with the Panthers, I like the. I was thinking about picking the Panthers for this one, but I think their defense is going to start to catch up in age, so they're going to have to do it quickly. The Jets are another candidate I thought of, but I think their cap situation is going to cause them to have to make some changes. But the Rams have shown an ability to kind of cycle out veterans and cycle in rookies who might be drafted in the later rounds but still manage to perform well. So they've had an eye for late talent that few other teams have had. So if that's something that they can continue to do, then they're going to be perpetual contenders.
With that, we continue refreshing away for the exciting results of the Week 10 4 p.m. games.
Yeah.
As always, leading off to the viewers, we're going to take probably a 30 to 1 minute long break as all of the panel looks at the results for themselves. And then we'll try to digest through what just happened.
Wouldn't just called Saluna Soldier.
No. Soldier Boy, tell him.
That's the best autocorrect I've seen in a while. Yeah, going back to the Rams, actually, I think it's interesting. I don't think they have like the greatest cap situation right now, and their talent is aging. So I do think they will have to rely a bit on restocking each draft. But if anyone can do it, then Taffy has shown the ability to.
Again, the big game this slate is the Pack taking on the Jaguars. I think the entire panel went with the Packers. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens for that game.
You're up.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
I see what you saw, I think. I see what you saw.
Jesus Christ. All right, a lot to digest. We'll try to do this quick and then wrap up. Starting off, Pittsburgh Steelers at Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta comes out with a hot start, ending halftime 28-7 up. They continue it to win the game 38-24. Dactor, what's your big takeaway from this game? Anything out of the ordinary?
Sorry. 1 second.
Sure thing. Let's have Storm jump in as Dactor tries to figure something out.
I think it's a great game for AJ Jefferson, despite the interception. He was razor sharp, certainly very efficient. He's able to close, threw for 3 touchdowns, nearly 300 yards. And like we said earlier about the Patriots, I think it was, there's a lot of value in being able to get an early lead and then get the ball to your running back and shorten the game in the second half. And that's exactly what the Falcons did.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Winning recipe out of the Falcons is controlling the ball. Jefferson was efficient, deadly. Riddick Smith has been playing pretty much like an all-pro this season. He's been one of the shining spots on our offense. Been very pleased with him. Pittsburgh gave us a heck of a game, especially because Rob Core was your starter. And to be fair, he's one of the top backup quarterbacks in the league. But I think things would be different if Davenport was there. So just the ball bounced in our favor this week, and we came out with a big win to stop our slide. Dactor, are you back?
Yeah. I was actually very impressed with AJ Jefferson this week. I've always been very critical of him, but this week he looked very good, and give him props for that. So
next up is the big kahuna, the Packers at the Jags. Packers come out 34-23 over Jacksonville. We see a bit of trickeration on the Jags side, but Christian Barkley really struggled today. Let's go with Storm again. What's your takeaways?
About what I expected. The Packers were the better team. They kind of imposed their will on Jacksonville, and Marquise. They just basically threw it straight through Jacksonville. And Justin McCain from that university in Chapel Hill had another solid game. Just everything that Jacksonville tries to do, Green Bay just does a little bit better.
All right, Dactor, thoughts on this game?
Very good performance by the Green Bay Packers. I want to give a shout out to probably my favorite player in the sim right now, Julio Barnes. He has another clutch interception. He's been an absolute beast this season. And Christian Barkley, he had a pretty disappointing game. 2 interceptions and pretty bad efficiency numbers against what hasn't been a great performing secondary. I think that really is the big story of this loss for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And another really well-balanced attack by this Packers offense results in a win.
Yeah, I love Justin McCain. Great showing out of him. Jason Johnson, very effective, still coming strong for the MVP game and big duel. And Christian Barkley, I think this is the first time I've really noticed him struggling like this, but I'm sure he'll bounce back. He's a young guy with a great career ahead of him. Next game, and one of the most important games maybe for both of these teams' seasons. We have the Chargers dropping it, but they also dropped Nick Hall. That's going to be the big story coming out of this. Late in the fourth quarter, Nick Hall goes down to a major hamstring injury. Reports say that he might be out for the year, but they're still trying to figure it out at the Raiders medical staff. Storm, what are your takeaways from this game?
My takeaways are that the Chiefs just won this game, and so did the Broncos, because the Raiders do not have any kind of margin for error, being 4-4. They have a nice schedule the rest of the way, but unless Robert Martin can hold up at least some of Nick Hall's end of the bargain, they never really had a run game to rely on. So that's going to be a major inhibiting factor for them down the stretch. So this made the AFC wildcard race and of course the AFC West divisional race a whole lot more interesting. It's just you just hate to see it happen this way, though.
Dactor, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, that's really bad for the Raiders. I think that knocks him out of the playoffs, actually. Matty Swift has another very similar game to last week where he threw 2 interceptions, had pretty bad efficiency numbers, but also threw 2 touchdowns. I wouldn't be overly concerned about that if I were the Chargers. I think he's showing some promise considering the situation he's in, and they should continue building around him. I do think he might be their future.
Yep, I'm a big Matty Swift homer. I love the kid, great personality. But yeah, Mike Gradishar coming up big as expected. This is a horrible loss for the Raiders. Nick Hall, one of the premier players in the league. Hopefully he's okay. But rumor is that he may be out for the year. So get ready for the Thursday night injury report, everybody. Next game, a complete shootout. Oh my goodness. Combining for 86 points. Chicago Bears lose 41-45 against the New Orleans Saints. Storm, what do you have for us?
Kick the ball through the uprights. Daniel Olsen, just do it for once, please. You can't miss a 24-yard field goal. How do you? Why?
Yeah.
We are drafting a kicker this year. We have to. But in other news, it obviously didn't help that we couldn't stop Devereaux or stop Sterling Brown. I don't think we were really expecting to stop them so much as slow them down. We didn't even slow them down. The good news is that our defense, at least the front seven, came to play. They racked up a season-high 6 sacks. Morris Millen forced a fumble. David Gaines and Donnie Allen were monsters, and Norris Brookshire had a great game, which is valuable in the sense that if he didn't have a great game against the secondary, that would have been a problem in itself, but it wasn't enough. 1 fumble on our side. I don't know. I don't know what to say about this one other than our defense still needs some overhauling, and so does our offense.
Yeah, what do you got for us, Doctor?
The Saints O-line, 6.7 O-line rating, that's terrible. And the fact that Aaron Devereaux was able to have almost 10 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns without an interception, and Sterling Brown also having almost 6 yards per carry, all with that O-line is just pretty incredible. So a very good performance from those two. I give the game ball to both of them. Meanwhile, Brookshire he looked good, which, as I said earlier, was kind of a requirement for him to not have a ton of pressure to even lose his job. So that's at least on the plus side, I guess, for Chicago, but this is a pretty disappointing loss for them.
I have a strong feeling that members of the Bears front office will be calling the NFL about the refereeing in this game. 95 penalty yards to the Saints 52. I think that was a big part of how the Saints pulled this out, because looking through, the Bears defense played their heart out. They got to the quarterback. They made fumbles happen. It's just very unfortunate. I have a feeling a lot of these were like offside calls or neutral zone infractions.
It was 9.5 yards per penalty. There were a lot of BS, roughing the passer or unnecessary roughness calls. This is football. It's a physical game. Somebody needs to tell John Perry that. This is
gotta let these kids play. Gotta let the boys play.
Yeah, this game was more rigged than the Warriors versus the Cavs.
Last game, and then we're tuning off, boys. Carolina Panthers 35, Minnesota Vikings 9. 2 lost fumbles by Sean Cole. Storm, what do you have for us?
Well, when I said that there was a path to the Vikings making this close one, that was a bad call. Their defense just unable to really stop the Panthers, who were, and really though, I think the big story for the Panthers is Chip Johnson stepping up out of nowhere. Really, they got good numbers out of Monte Jackson and Curtis Henry, but having a third threat on the team to attack that second corner and make sure that defenses can't just try to bracket one guy. Is going to be critical for them. They basically just got production from all over the field on offense, and with Minnesota, could have gone better, could have gone worse. Missing an extra point's never a good look. Kind of just a capstone on what was already a bad day for them. But this is kind of in line with what we've seen from them the rest of the year, though.
All right, give us your thoughts, Dexter.
I want to give a shout out to Wayne Weggert. He had 125 yards and a touchdown. Now, Wayne Weggert might be the worst wide receiver in world history. I might be a better wide receiver than Wayne Weggert. So watching him do this, it's incredible. It's the story of this game. Just Chip Johnson, also for the Carolina Panthers, another kind of lesser-known wide receiver, stepping up big with 125 yards and two touchdowns. Those, wow, those. Hold on, the wide receiver number one for the Panthers and the Vikings both had 125 yards, and the second wide receivers for both of them also had 65 yards both. So, kind of interesting.
Yep, I'm going to give the game ball for the Panthers to their D-line. Wallabaugh, the big nose tackle, 2 fumble recoveries. The edge defenders, Ron Rice and Kendrick Jones, both forcing fumbles out of Sean Cole. The turnovers, killed the Vikings today, along with their lack of an offense. Great showing all around. That'll be it for us here at the studio. NFL Live tuning off. Again, I'm your host, Sagebo, along with Dexter and Storm. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for listening.